you desire a break, or should we move on to our regular?
Move on.
I see we have Mr. Davies in attendance, and patiently listening and observing.
Great.
Philip?
Also, yes, Commissioners, the next item on your regular agenda is to share with you our staff's evaluation of the proposals for public defense services and to request your confirmation of the selection of Jefferson Associated Counsel as our public defender to provide indigent defense for district, juvenile, and superior courts. Also, as I was reviewing the packet, I noted that we were missing every other page in the copy of Jefferson Associated Counsel's proposal, so I have fresh copies for commissioners and any member of the public that might want one. So it is a good way to cut down, the length of things, just to copy every other page. Anybody else? I see reaching out email from what you Anybody else? So, in December, the county issued a request for proposals for indigent defense. We held a pre-bid conference in early January, and then based on some of the questions and comments that came through the pre-bid conference with interested firms, we issued a revised request for proposal that had some clarifications and a few corrections in it. And the deadline for submittal was January 28th. We had 4 firms apply: Jefferson Associated Counsel, Harrison Law, Hassan Ramirez, and Montoya were the 4 firms that submitted. And in the RFP, we had included a scoring system for how we would weight and evaluate proposals, both based on written submittals and also on the interviews that we subsequently held. We also did a couple of things in restructuring how we were looking at indigent defense. One of the things that we created is looking at the state bar standards, which we've adopted by ordinance as standards for providing indigent defense in Jefferson County. We looked at creating, the state bar standards has some guidelines on what kind of caseloads an attorney should carry within each of the respective courts and case types. And so what we did is we actually created a point system for cases, and then looked at 2010 and the record of the different volumes and types of cases that came in, and actually developed a spreadsheet, if you will, of how many case points we would be contracting for. And so, for example, a felony case would be worth, let me back up. In district court, a pre-judgment case would be worth 1 point, whereas in superior court, a felony case, that would be worth 2.67 points, and so on down the line. So not all cases are created equal in terms of the time and attention from a defense attorney that they would take. And so we created the points to sort of weight them and put them on an equal playing field, if you would. We also structured, and the significance of that is it not only helps, I think, responding firms look at appropriate FTE levels to build into their response, but it also allowed us then to set up a system for how we would handle if caseloads were running lower or if caseloads were exceeding sort of the contracted caseload point that we were purchasing. on an annual basis. So that's built into both the RFP and the draft contract that we put out as part of the RFP. We also asked firms to give us their qualifications and also costs under 3 scenarios. One, that they would take what you might call the whole enchilada, that they would provide coverage in all 3 courts. The second alternative was splitting the caseloads between district court, which has lots of cases, and on the one hand, and superior and juvenile court, which have fewer number of cases, but they have higher caseload point values. And interestingly enough, when you split the 2 out, it's about equal number of points and staffing on either side. And so we asked the firms to also bid for the district court half and also for the superior and juvenile court half. We had a review panel that was comprised of the administrators from superior and district courts, and also the guardian ad litem coordinator out of juvenile, Lorna Delaney, our HR manager, and myself. And we went through and evaluated the qualifications and used the scoring that was in the RFP. And ultimately, Jefferson Associated Counsel scored significantly higher than any of the other firms. They scored out of a total of 100 points, they scored 88. The next highest firm was 72. Jefferson Associated Counsel scored the highest in 3 of the 5 categories, and were in a virtual tie with a leader in the other 2, just a couple of points away. So they almost did a clean sweep on qualifications. We also priced the different scenarios of dividing the caseloads between 2 firms or having it with 1. The advantage of dividing between two firms potentially is when you're in court, for example, if there are multiple defendants that are indigent for the same case, one firm cannot represent both defendants. That's called a conflict. And so somebody else has to take the second defendant. And currently, all the courts appoint local attorneys off of a rotating roster that they keep of just attorneys who are in private practice that are willing to take on some of these conflict cases at an hourly rate. I believe $55 in district court and $65 per hour in superior court. And when the hours get long, those numbers can add up. And indeed, you saw in superior court last year a supplemental appropriation to cover some of those conflict case costs. And so if you divide the caseload between 2 firms, one of the potential advantages that you get is firm A can cover the first level of conflict for firm B, and vice versa. And so there's potentially some conflict cost savings, and we calculated that. But what we were finding is when you add up primary defense, public defense, and all the conflict cases, we're looking at a budget of slightly in excess of $500,000 a year to provide for indigent defense. And yet what we were looking at is maybe a savings of about $20,000 a year if we were to divide it up. And in view of the difference in the scoring and the qualifications between the runner-up and the top firm, this is an important constitutional right, and it didn't seem to make sense to divide it for such limited and speculative savings. So I'm recommending, and the whole panel is recommending, that we award to one firm, and that would be Jefferson Associated Counsel, We're looking to complete contract negotiations if you agree, in an expedited fashion so that we would have a contract executed prior to the start of service March 1. So with that, I'll take any questions the commissioners might have.
So with the conflict case, with just one contracted, then the courts would handle that the way they do now?
Right. One of the things that I plan to do and have already talked with some of the interested firms, is looking at if there are ways that we may still be able to save some of the costs of conflict cases. So for example, right now, as the conflicts come up, they sort of rotate them through the different firms that are on the roster for each court. But if you look at it over time and statistically, that ends up being X number of cases. And so rather than just going on a hourly basis for case by case, one might be able to contract for X number of cases. You know, you lowball it a little bit because you don't want to pay for extra. But you look at the historical pattern on conflict cases, and it may be possible to enter into subsequent contracts with local attorneys to handle some of those cases. You know, they basically buy a certain chunk of those cases at the beginning of the year. Now, whether that will actually save money or not, we won't know unless we try. So we'll give it a try and we'll take a look.
I'll go ahead and make a motion then that we confirm the selection of Jefferson Associated Counsel and direct staff to attempt to negotiate a contract for subsequent approval by the BOCC. And if an unacceptable contract cannot be negotiated, staff would then begin negotiations for the next most qualified firm.
Right. And commissioners, before you vote, I don't know if you want to invite Mr. Davies to make any comments.
Mr. Davis like to make some comments?
Well, I'm just here if you have any questions about what we provide and what we hope to keep providing.
Let's see if we got a second, and then we'll have discussion, and then,
I'll give it a second.
okay, it's been moved and seconded, and now we're open for further discussion.
I'll just say that, you know, it does give you a leg up when you've been doing the job, I guess, and responding for request and proposal, because you know what the system's like and you know what it's like to provide the service. And we don't get into the court's business very much, you know, separation of powers issues and all that, but we do the budgets, and we have been through this before. And as I think I've said in the past, it's the absence of complaints that strikes me. You know, I don't hear about problems. You know, I hear positive things about the quality of defense people have been getting when I hear anything at all. So usually that's a very good sign for me not to hear about problems in that regard. But we've got the recommendations of the people on the committee here that are doing the job, you know, and know the ins and outs of the system. So I respect that too.